The spring of 1885 painted Montana's Pine Valley in promises not yet broken. It was a time when mail-order brides arrived with hope packed tighter than their trunks, when men measured worth by acreage and cattle counts, and when a woman passed. 25 carried the whispered curse of being shelf-worn. But some stories refuse to follow the rules that people set for them. Some hearts find each other despite the odds stacked mountain high against them. Rebecca Taylor stood on the Oakridge train platform, clutching a crumpled letter and fighting the April wind that seemed determined to steal both her hat and her courage. 28 years old, too educated to be biddable, too independent to be desirable, too old to be first choice. The station agent kept glancing at her, wondering which poor fool had sent for damaged goods. 5 miles away, Matthew Reynolds sat in his brother's study at Evergreen Ranch, staring at a photograph he'd never asked to see of a bride he'd never asked to marry. His silver hair caught the light from the window, not the distinguished gray of advanced age, but the premature silver that had marked him since 30. Different, set apart, a curiosity that made the local women whisper behind their hands. "She's arriving today," Samuel said, voice flat as the prairie in winter. "The woman answering your advertisement." "Your advertisement," Matt corrected, fingers tightening on the armrest. "I never agreed to this." What neither of them knew was that fate doesn't much care for human plans. It writes its own stories with ink made of chance encounters and unexpected glances, and sometimes, just sometimes, it rewrites endings that everyone else thought were already sealed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Pine Valley spread itself across Montana territory like a secret not everyone was meant to discover. The Reynolds Evergreen Ranch commanded the northern expanse, 8,000 acres of prime grazing land, timber-rich forests, and clean-running streams. For 40 years, it had been ruled by the iron will of Jeremiah Reynolds, until consumption claimed him 3 winters past. Now his eldest son, Samuel, held the reins with the same rigid principles, but none of the buried tenderness. Matthew Reynolds, younger by 5 years, worked the ranch with quiet competence. At 45, his hands bore the weathered evidence of decades wrangling cattle and breaking horses. But it was his unusual appearance that made him a figure of curiosity in Oakridge. His hair had turned completely silver by his 30th birthday, thick and gleaming like moonlight on water. In his face, you could read both gentleness and resolve, patience and untamed spirit. The study where the brothers now sat had been unchanged since their father's passing. Leather-bound ledgers, mounted elk head, maps of grazing routes inked by 3 generations of Reynolds men. April sunshine slanted through windows that needed washing, casting light on the gulf between 2 men, sharing blood but little understanding. "You need a wife," Samuel said, leaning back in their father's chair. "This place needs proper keeping. The men need a woman's cooking. And it's time you stop being the odd bachelor people gossip about." Matt's jaw tightened. "If I wanted a wife, I'd have found one. I don't need you ordering me a woman like she's a new plow from the Sears catalog. You've rejected every suitable match in the county," Samuel countered. "Eleanor Wilson's been widowed 3 years and makes no secret she'd have you. Decent family, good Christian woman, and cold as January," Matt muttered. "I won't marry just to satisfy appearances." Samuel slid the photograph across the desk, a formal portrait of a woman with serious eyes and hair pulled severely back. Rebecca Taylor, 28, from Boston, educated. References say she's of fine character, capable, and comes from reduced circumstances. Matt picked up the photo, studying the face that gazed steadily at the camera. Something in those eyes, a quiet defiance perhaps, made him pause. 28? "Yes, older than ideal," Samuel acknowledged with a dismissive wave. But beggars can't be choosers. You need a practical arrangement, not some flighty young thing with romantic notions. She arrives today on the afternoon train. Pastor Miller is ready to perform the ceremony tomorrow. Matt stood abruptly. This is madness, Sam. I won't marry a stranger because you've decided it's time. Father would expect. Father's dead, Matt cut in, voice low but firm. And I'm not a stallion you can lead to breeding. Samuel's expression hardened. The wagon's already heading to town to collect her. At least show the decency to meet the woman who's traveled across the country on your account. On your account, Matt corrected again. But something in him, curiosity perhaps, or an inexplicable pull toward those serious eyes in the photograph, made him reach for his hat. I'll meet her, but I'm making no promises beyond that. Rebecca, Taylor had never felt more alone than standing on that wind-swept platform as the train pulled away, leaving her behind like so many of life's promises. Her navy traveling dress, her best, remade 3 times over the years, suddenly felt inadequate against the scrutiny of strangers. At 28, she was undertaking the journey younger women made out of innocent hope. She came armed with something different, determination forged in the crucible of necessity. When her father's publishing business collapsed, taking with it their comfortable Boston life, Rebecca had faced limited options. Teaching positions were scarce. Companion. Roles went to older women. Marriage prospects for blue stockings approaching 30 were virtually non-existent in Boston society. The advertisement in the matrimonial news had seemed a final, desperate chance. A ranch owner in Montana seeking a practical wife. She'd answered with honest practicality of her own, never mentioning her age until correspondence was well established. Now she wondered if honesty had been a mistake. The station master's pitying glance told her everything about her prospects. She squared her shoulders, refusing to bow under the weight of judgment. A weathered wagon with Reynolds Ranch, painted on its side, pulled up to the station. Rebecca adjusted her small hat, picked up her trunk, and stepped forward to meet her. Fate, only to be greeted by a teenage boy who couldn't quite meet her eyes. Miss Taylor, I'm Tommy, the ranch hand. Mr. Reynolds sent me to fetch you. He scrambled down, reaching awkwardly for her trunk. Which Mr. Reynolds? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Mr. Samuel, Tommy mumbled. He runs things. His brother, Mr. Matthew, The boy trailed off, suddenly fascinated by the wagon's wheel. He's having second thoughts, Rebecca finished for him, her heart sinking despite her determination to remain pragmatic. The ride to Evergreen Ranch passed in uncomfortable silence, broken only by Tommy's occasional pointing out of landmarks. Rebecca absorbed everything. The sweeping vistas, the lush valley nestled between rugged mountains, the cattle grazing on spring grass. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way that both terrified and exhilarated her. So different from Boston's. Crowded streets and red brick certainties. They crested a hill, and the ranch spread before them, a substantial 2-story house, bunkhouse, barn, corrals, and outbuildings. A small empire carved from wilderness by generations of Reynolds men. Rebecca steeled herself. Whatever waited for her in that house, she would face it with dignity. She hadn't crossed a continent to be found wanting, without even a fair chance. As the wagon rolled into the yard, 2 men emerged from the main house. One tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair graying at the temples. Samuel Reynolds, she guessed. The other, Rebecca's breath caught. The second man stood slightly apart, straight-backed and lean. His hair caught the afternoon sun like polished silver, though his face showed him to be nowhere near old enough for such a distinguished mane. Handsome in a weathered way, with eyes that seemed to take her measure in a single glance. Matthew Reynolds, the man who hadn't asked for her. The wagon halted. Tommy jumped down to help with her trunk, but Matthew stepped forward. "I can assist Miss Taylor," he said, his voice deep and clear. Rebecca gathered her skirts and accepted his outstretched hand, determined not to appear either too eager or too too reluctant. His palm was warm and calloused against hers, the grip firm but gentle. "Miss Taylor," Samuel Reynolds stepped forward. "Welcome to Evergreen Ranch. I trust your journey was uneventful." "As uneventful as crossing half a continent can be, Mr. Reynolds," she replied evenly, withdrawing her hand from Matthew's grasp. "Thank you for your correspondence." Samuel nodded stiffly. "You must be tired. We've prepared a room. The pastor is expecting us tomorrow at 10. "Perhaps," Matthew interjected, "Miss Taylor might appreciate some time to rest and become acquainted before we discuss weddings." Rebecca's gaze shifted to Matthew, surprised by this small kindness. Samuel frowned. "Arrangements are made." "The whole town can wait," Matthew finished firmly. "Miss Taylor has traveled far. Common courtesy demands we allow her to catch her breath before making life-altering decisions." A silent battle of wills passed between the brothers, visible in the tightening of Samuel's jaw and the steady calm of Matthew's gaze. Finally, Samuel inclined his head. "As you wish. 1 day's delay. Mrs. Cooper has prepared the guest room. She'll show you upstairs, Miss Taylor." As if summoned by her name, an older woman appeared on the porch. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Her smile seemed the first genuine welcome Rebecca had received since arriving in Montana. "Come along, dear," Mrs. Cooper called. "You look like you could use a hot bath and a moment's peace." Rebecca followed, aware of Matthew Reynolds watching her retreat, not with distaste or disappointment as she had feared, but with something more complex. Curiosity, perhaps, or recognition of a fellow soul caught in circumstances not entirely of their choosing. The guest room was simple but comfortable. Clean linens, polished furniture, a window overlooking the valley. Mrs. Cooper filled a hip bath with steaming water scented with dried lavender. "Don't you worry about those Reynolds men," she confided as she laid out fresh towels. "Samuel runs things with a heavy hand because that's what his father taught him. But Matthew, he sees more than folks give him credit for. He doesn't want this marriage," Rebecca stated plainly, too exhausted for pretense. Mrs. Cooper's kind eyes crinkled. "Samuel doesn't leave much room for wants, only duties. But Matthew, he's got his own mind beneath that silver hair. Always has. Left alone." Rebecca sank into the bath, allowing herself a moment of vulnerability no one would witness. She had risked everything on this journey. Failure meant destitution. Success meant marriage to a stranger who hadn't chosen her. Neither prospect offered much comfort. Yet something about Matthew Reynolds, the quiet dignity, the small kindness of postponing the wedding, the way his eyes had assessed her without dismissing her, gave her a fragile thread of hope to cling to. As twilight softened the Montana sky, Rebecca dressed in her second-best dress, a dark green wool that brought out the hazel in her eyes, and made her way downstairs, ready to face whatever judgment awaited her. The dining room was dominated by a long oak table that could seat 12, but was set for 4. Samuel sat at its head, with Matthew to his right. Mrs. Cooper bustled in from the kitchen, smiling approvingly at Rebecca. "There you are, dear, just in time. Sit yourself down. I've made a proper roast to welcome you." Rebecca took the seat across from Matthew, feeling Samuel's evaluating gaze. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Matthew spoke. "I hope you found your accommodations acceptable, Miss Taylor." "Very much so, Mr. Reynolds. You have a beautiful home." Samuel cleared his throat. "Mrs. Cooper says you brought books in your trunk. You enjoy reading?" The question carried subtle judgment. Women who read too much were often considered unsuitable for practical frontier life. "I do," Rebecca answered plainly. "My father was a publisher in Boston. Books were our livelihood and our passion." Not much use for publishing out here, Samuel remarked. Perhaps not, Rebecca conceded, but literacy and knowledge serve people anywhere. I've taught reading to children and adults alike. Matthew leaned forward slightly. You were a teacher. Among other things, when circumstances required. Other things, Samuel pressed. Rebecca met his gaze steadily. I've kept account books, managed household staff, nursed my father through his final illness, and sold our remaining household goods to fund this journey. I'm not afraid of work, Mr. Reynolds, whatever form it takes. A flicker of something, respect perhaps, crossed Matthew's face. Samuel merely nodded, as if checking items off a mental list of requirements. The meal progressed with stilted conversation about the ranch, the town, and the coming spring roundup. Rebecca answered questions directly and asked appropriate ones, of her own, revealing neither too much nor too little. A negotiation of sorts, showing her worth without appearing desperate. When Mrs. Cooper brought apple pie, Samuel finally addressed the matter hanging over them all. Pastor Miller expects us at 10 tomorrow. The ceremony will be brief. I've arranged for Mrs. Harris from town to alter one of our mother's dresses for you. Rebecca set down her fork carefully. You're very efficient, Mr. Reynolds. Samuel, Matthew interrupted. Might Miss Taylor have some say in these arrangements? All eyes turned to Rebecca. She took a measured breath. I appreciate the preparations, Mr. Reynolds, but I believe both your brother and I deserve certainty before making such a commitment. Perhaps we might have a private conversation. Samuel's expression darkened. Matthew's eyebrows rose slightly, but a hint of a smile touched his lips. Matthew can show you the garden after dinner, Samuel conceded grudgingly. But understand this, Miss Taylor, this ranch needs stability. My brother needs a wife. You need security. Practicality should guide all our decisions. Rebecca nodded once. Practicality is precisely what I wish to discuss. After dinner, as promised, Matthew led Rebecca to a small garden behind the house. Spring had coaxed early wildflowers from the soil, their faces turned to the fading light. They walked in silence for several moments before Rebecca gathered her courage. You didn't send for me, did you, Mr. Reynolds? Matthew stopped, turning to face her directly. In the dusk, his silver hair seemed to gather what little light remained. No, Miss Taylor, I didn't. That was Samuel's doing. And you have no desire for this marriage. It wasn't a question, but Matthew answered anyway. I have no desire for a marriage of convenience arranged without my consent. Rebecca nodded, surprising herself with her steady voice. Then we understand each other. I came here seeking security and respectable work as a wife, but I won't bind myself to a man who resents my presence. I don't resent you, Matthew said quietly. I resent being managed like one of our prize bulls. A startled laugh escaped Rebecca before she could stop it. Matthew's eyes widened, then crinkled at the corners as his own laugh joined hers. A rich, warm sound that seemed to surprise him as much as her. Forgive me, she said, composing herself. It's just, that's exactly how I felt, answering that advertisement. Like breeding stock being evaluated for usefulness. Samuel means well, Matthew sighed. In his mind, this is all perfectly sensible. And in your mind, Matthew studied her face in the gathering darkness. In my mind, Miss Taylor, marriage should be more than a business arrangement, even out here where practicality rules most decisions. Rebecca smoothed her skirts, buying time to steady her voice. I should tell you, Mr. Reynolds, that I've been entirely honest in my correspondence. I'm 28, I'm educated, I have limited prospects elsewhere, but I'm not desperate enough to trap a man into marriage against his will. And I'm not cruel enough to send a woman back across the country with nowhere to go, Matthew countered, especially one who laughs at being compared to a prize bull. They regarded each other in the twilight, two people caught between duty and dignity, practicality, and personal choice. Perhaps, Rebecca suggested carefully, we might reach a compromise. I could stay on as a housekeeper or teacher for a trial period. We could become acquainted without the immediate pressure of vows neither of us is ready to exchange. Matthew's expression shifted from surprise to consideration. Samuel won't like it. Samuel isn't the one being asked to marry a stranger. Another chuckle escaped Matthew. No, he certainly isn't. He extended his hand. A compromise then, Miss Taylor. I'll speak to Samuel tonight. Rebecca took his offered hand, feeling calluses against her palm and something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Not hope, exactly, but its cautious cousin. Possibility. Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. Matthew, he corrected gently. If we're to be friends rather than reluctant spouses, you should call me Matthew. Rebecca, she offered in return. Their hands remained joined a moment longer than necessary. Above them, the first stars appeared in the Montana sky, distant, certainly, but steadfast in their light. As the wagon rolled into the yard, two men emerged from the main house, one tall and broad-shouldered with dark hair graying at the temples. Samuel Reynolds, she guessed. The other, Rebecca's breath caught. The second man stood slightly apart, straight-backed and lean. His hair caught the afternoon sun like polished silver, though his face showed him to be nowhere near old enough for such a distinguished mien. Handsome in a weathered way, with eyes that seemed to take her measure in a single glance. Matthew Reynolds, the man who hadn't asked for her. The wagon halted. Tommy jumped down to help with her trunk, but Matthew stepped forward. I can assist Miss Taylor, he said, his voice deep and clear. Rebecca gathered her skirts and accepted his outstretched hand, determined not to appear either too eager or too reluctant. His palm was warm and calloused against hers, the grip firm but gentle. Miss Taylor, Samuel Reynolds stepped forward. Welcome to Evergreen Ranch. I trust your journey was uneventful. As uneventful as crossing half a continent can be, Mr. Reynolds, she replied evenly, withdrawing her hand from Matthew's grasp. Thank you for your correspondence. Samuel nodded stiffly. You must be tired. We've prepared a room. The pastor is expecting us tomorrow at 10. Perhaps, Matthew interjected, Miss Taylor might appreciate some time to rest and become acquainted before we discuss weddings. Rebecca's gaze shifted to Matthew, surprised by this small kindness. Samuel frowned. Arrangements are made. The whole town can wait, Matthew finished firmly. Miss Taylor has traveled far. Common courtesy demands we allow her to catch her breath before making life-altering decisions. A silent battle of wills passed between the brothers, visible in the tightening of Samuel's jaw and the steady calm of Matthew's gaze. Finally, Samuel inclined his head. As you wish. 1 day's delay. Mrs. Cooper has prepared the guest room. She'll show you upstairs, Miss Taylor. As if summoned by her name, an older woman appeared on the porch. Her smile seemed the first genuine welcome Rebecca had received since arriving in Montana. Come. Along, dear, Mrs. Cooper called. You look like you could use a hot bath and a moment's peace. Rebecca followed, aware of Matthew Reynolds watching her retreat, not with distaste or disappointment as she had feared, but with something more. Complex, curiosity perhaps, or recognition of a fellow soul caught in circumstances not entirely of their choosing. The guest room was simple but comfortable. Clean linens, polished furniture, a window overlooking the valley. Mrs. Cooper filled a hip bath with steaming water scented with dried lavender. Don't you worry about those Reynolds men, she confided, as she laid out fresh towels. Samuel runs things with a heavy hand because that's what his father taught him. But Matthew, he sees more than folks give him credit for. He doesn't want this marriage, Rebecca stated plainly, too exhausted. For pretense, Mrs. Cooper's kind eyes crinkled. Samuel doesn't leave much room for wants, only duties. But Matthew, he's got his own mind beneath that silver hair. Always has. Left alone, Rebecca sank into the bath, allowing herself a moment of vulnerability no one would witness. She had risked everything on this journey. Failure meant destitution. Success meant marriage to a stranger who hadn't chosen her. Neither prospect offered much comfort. Yet something about Matthew Reynolds, the quiet dignity, the small kindness of postponing the wedding, the way his eyes had assessed her without dismissing her, gave her a fragile thread of hope to cling to. As twilight softened the Montana sky, Rebecca dressed in her second-best dress, a dark green wool that brought out the hazel in her eyes, and made her way downstairs, ready to face whatever judgment awaited her. The dining room was dominated by a long oak table that could seat 12, but was set for 4. Samuel sat at its head with Matthew to his right. Mrs. Cooper bustled in from the kitchen, smiling approvingly at Rebecca. "There you are, dear. Just in time. Sit yourself down. I've made a proper roast to welcome you." Rebecca took the seat across from Matthew, feeling Samuel's evaluating gaze. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Matthew spoke. "I hope you found your accommodations acceptable, Miss Taylor." "Very much so, Mr. Reynolds. You have a beautiful home." Samuel cleared his throat. "Mrs. Cooper says you brought books in your trunk. You enjoy reading?" The question carried subtle judgment. Women who read too much were often considered unsuitable for practical frontier life. "I do," Rebecca answered plainly. "My father was a publisher in Boston. Books were our livelihood and our passion." "Not much use for publishing out here," Samuel remarked. "Perhaps not," Rebecca conceded, "but literacy and knowledge serve people anywhere. I've taught reading to children and adults alike." Matthew leaned forward slightly. "You were a teacher." "Among other things, when circumstances required." "Other things?" Samuel pressed. Rebecca met his gaze steadily. "I've kept account books, managed household staff, nursed my father through his final illness, and sold our remaining household goods to fund this journey. I'm not afraid of work, Mr. Reynolds, whatever form it takes." A flicker of something, respect perhaps, crossed Matthew's face. Samuel merely nodded, as if checking items off a mental list of requirements. The meal progressed with stilted conversation about the ranch, the town, and the coming spring roundup. Rebecca answered questions directly and asked appropriate ones, of her own, revealing neither too much nor too little, a negotiation of sorts, showing her worth without appearing desperate. When Mrs. Cooper brought apple pie, Samuel finally addressed the matter hanging over them all. "Pastor Miller expects us at 10 tomorrow. The ceremony will be brief. I've arranged for Mrs. Harris from town to alter one of our mother's dresses for you." Rebecca set down her fork carefully. "You're very efficient, Mr. Reynolds." "Samuel," Matthew interrupted, "might Miss Taylor have some say in these arrangements?" All eyes turned to Rebecca. She took a measured breath. "I appreciate the preparations, Mr. Reynolds, but I believe both your brother and I deserve certainty before making such a commitment. Perhaps we might have a private conversation." Samuel's expression darkened. Matthew's eyebrows rose slightly, but a hint of a smile touched his lips. "Matthew can show you the garden after dinner," Samuel conceded grudgingly. "But understand this, Miss Taylor. This ranch needs stability. My brother needs a wife. You need security. Practicality should guide all our decisions." Rebecca nodded once. "Practicality is precisely what I wish to discuss." After dinner, as promised, Matthew led Rebecca to a small garden behind the house. Spring had coaxed early wildflowers from the soil. Their faces turned to the fading light. They walked in silence for several moments before Rebecca gathered her courage. "You didn't send for me, did you, Mr. Reynolds?" Matthew stopped, turning to face her directly. In the dusk, his silver hair seemed to gather what little light remained. "No, Miss Taylor, I didn't. That was Samuel's doing." "And you have no desire?" Over this marriage. It wasn't a question, but Matthew answered anyway. I have no desire for a marriage of convenience arranged without my consent. Rebecca nodded, surprising herself with her steady voice. Then we understand each other. I came here seeking security and respectable work as a wife, but I won't bind myself to a man who resents my presence. I don't resent you, Matthew said quietly. I resent being managed like one of our prize bulls. A startled laugh escaped Rebecca before she could stop it. Matthew's eyes widened, then crinkled at the corners as his own laugh joined hers, a rich, warm sound that seemed to surprise him as much as her. Forgive me, she said, composing herself. It's just that's exactly how I felt answering that advertisement, like breeding stock being evaluated for usefulness. Samuel means well, Matthew sighed. In his mind, this is all perfectly sensible. And in your mind, Matthew studied her face in the gathering darkness. In my mind, Miss Taylor, marriage should be more than a business arrangement, even out here where practicality rules most decisions. Rebecca smoothed her skirts, buying time to steady her voice. I should tell you, Mr. Reynolds, that I've been entirely honest in my correspondence. I am 28. I am educated. I have limited prospects elsewhere. But I'm not desperate enough to trap a man into marriage against his will. And I'm not cruel enough to send a woman back across the country with nowhere to go, Matthew countered, especially one who laughs at being compared to a prize bull. They regarded each other in the twilight. Two people caught between duty and dignity, practicality and personal choice. Perhaps, Rebecca suggested carefully, we might reach a compromise. I could stay on as a housekeeper or teacher for a trial period. We could become acquainted without the immediate pressure of vows neither of us is ready to exchange. Matthew's expression shifted from surprise to consideration. Samuel won't like it. Samuel isn't the one being asked to marry a stranger. Another chuckle escaped Matthew. No, he certainly isn't. He extended his hand. A compromise then, Miss Taylor. I'll speak to Samuel tonight. Rebecca took his offered hand, feeling calluses against her palm and something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Not hope, exactly, but its cautious cousin, possibility. Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. Matthew, he corrected gently. If we're to be friends rather than reluctant spouses, you should call me Matthew. Rebecca, she offered in return. Their hands remained joined a moment longer than necessary. Above them, the first stars appeared in the Montana sky, distant certainly, but steadfast in their light. The conversation with Samuel went exactly as Matthew had expected. Poorly. They stood in the study, midnight oil burning low, voices kept hushed so as not to carry through the old house's walls. Absolutely not. Samuel paced the worn carpet like a caged mountain lion. She came here to be a wife, not a hired woman. She came here seeking a place where her skills are valued, Matthew countered. And I'm offering that without forcing either of us into a hasty marriage. Samuel halted, eyes narrowing. Is it her age? Is that what troubles you? Matthew shook his head, impatience tightening his jaw. Her age is immaterial. What troubles me is being shackled to another human being without choice or consideration. You've had choice for 15 years, Samuel's voice hardened. 15 years of refusing perfectly suitable matches. Meanwhile, this ranch, father's legacy, struggles without a proper woman's touch. Mrs. Cooper manages the house well enough. Mrs. Cooper is aging and has her doctor husband to care for. We need permanence, Matthew. Stability. Matthew leaned against the desk, silver hair falling across his forehead. And you'll have it if Miss Taylor and I find we suit each other. If? Samuel scoffed. What is this, some penny romance novel? You're 45 years old, Matthew. She's 28. Neither of you has the luxury of if. What happens when she decides she doesn't suit after 3 months? After we've paid her wages and housed her? Then she'll have earned her keep and her passage elsewhere, and we'll have lost nothing but a bit of pride. Samuel's face turned thunderous. Pride is everything, Matthew. Our name, our reputation. What will people say when the mail-order bride decides the Reynoldses aren't good enough after all? Matthew straightened, something in him hardening. I don't give a damn what people say, and neither would Father if it meant doing right by a woman who's traveled 1,500 miles on false pretenses. The brothers stared at each other across a chasm wider than mere feet. Samuel spoke first, voice low but sharp. 1 month. She can stay as a housekeeper for 1 month. After that, either she marries you or she leaves with fair compensation for her time. I won't have this ranch becoming fodder for gossip any longer than necessary. Matthew nodded once, recognizing the concession for what it was, the most Samuel could bend without breaking. Agreed. And you'll make a genuine effort, Samuel added, warning in his tone. No hiding in the north pasture, dawn till dusk. A faint smile touched Matthew's lips. I'm hardly the one who's been avoiding matrimony in this house, Sam. Samuel's shoulders stiffened. I was married to this ranch the day Father died. That's burden enough. He turned away, signaling the discussion's end. Tell her yourself tomorrow. I won't be party to explanations. Dawn found Rebecca already, awake, sitting by her window, watching thin ribbons of mist curl through the valley pines. She'd slept fitfully, dreams crowded with train whistles, disapproving faces, and once, oddly, the image of silver hair catching starlight. The compromise she'd proposed felt both brave and foolhardy in the cold light of morning. Surely Samuel Reynolds would never agree to such an arrangement. She'd be on the eastbound train by noon, dignity intact, but prospects bleaker than ever. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Cooper entered bearing a tray with coffee, warm bread, and preserves. Thought you might like breakfast before facing those men, she said, setting the tray on a small table. Matthew was up half the night with Samuel. Voices raised something fierce. Rebecca's stomach tightened. I've caused discord in your household. I'm sorry for that. Mrs. Cooper snorted softly. This household had discord before you set foot in it, Miss Taylor. The Reynolds brothers may share blood, but they've got different hearts. One beating for duty, the other for... She paused, considering. Well, for something else altogether. Will I be leaving today? Rebecca asked directly, hands steady as she poured coffee, though her insides trembled. That's not for me to say, but Matthew's already out tending the horses, which means he's thinking hard about something. When that man needs to sort his mind, he turns to animals first, people second. Mrs. Cooper patted Rebecca's hand. Eat. Whatever comes will be easier faced with something in your stomach. Rebecca managed a few bites of the excellent bread and preserves before dressing in her navy traveling dress again. If she was to be sent away, she would go as she had arrived, composed, dignified, hiding vulnerability beneath practicality. She descended the stairs to find the house quiet, too quiet. No sign of Samuel, Mrs. Cooper, or Matthew. Only Tommy was visible through the window, carrying buckets across the yard. Rebecca hesitated, then gathered her courage and stepped outside. The morning air carried the scent of pine and damp earth. Montana in spring felt crisp, vital, nothing like Boston's sooty dampness. She pulled her shawl closer and crossed toward the barn where she suspected Matthew might be found. She was right. He stood in the wide doorway, silver hair gleaming in morning light, watching her approach. Their eyes met across the yard, neither smiling, neither turning away. Good morning, Miss Taylor, he called as she drew nearer. I hope you slept well. Well enough, thank you, she replied, stopping a respectable distance from him. I understand you and your brother had a long discussion about my proposal. Matthew nodded, his expression giving nothing away. We did. Samuel is a man of firm convictions. Rebecca's heart sank. She straightened her shoulders, preparing for rejection. "I see. I'll gather my things then." "For what purpose?" Matthew tilted his head, a surprising glint appearing in his eyes. "To leave," Rebecca replied, confused. "If your brother rejected my proposal—" "He modified it," Matthew interrupted. "1 month as our housekeeper, after which time we either proceed with the marriage as planned or you depart with fair compensation for your work." Hope and wariness tangled in Rebecca's chest. "And you agreed to this arrangement?" "I did. It seems a reasonable compromise. If you find it acceptable." Rebecca studied him, trying to read beyond his measured words. "And after that month, what expectations should I have?" Matthew's gaze remained steady. "That we will both make an honest evaluation of whether we suit each other as partners in life, no more, no less. Without pressure or obligation from your brother?" A faint smile touched Matthew's lips. "Samuel will always exert pressure, Miss Taylor. It's his nature, but the final decision will be ours alone." Rebecca considered this. 1 month to prove her worth, to determine whether a life at Evergreen Ranch might offer more than mere security. 1 month to know the silver-haired man before her, who had fought his brother for her sake when he might easily have sent her away. "I accept," she said finally, "and I'll earn my keep. You won't find me wanting in diligence." "I never suspected I would," Matthew replied quietly. Something in his tone made her look up sharply, but his expression had already shifted to practical matters. "Mrs. Cooper will show you the household. You'll have Sundays free, of course, and any assistance you require from me or the hands you need only ask." Rebecca nodded, relief making her almost lightheaded. "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. Matthew." "It is I who should thank you," he said, surprising her, "for your understanding and flexibility in a difficult situation." Their eyes held a moment longer than necessary. Then Matthew cleared his throat. "I should see to the north fence line. Samuel mentioned it needed repair." He tipped his hat slightly. "Until dinner, then." Rebecca watched him stride away, his tall figure soon disappearing around the corner of the barn. Only then did she permit herself a deep, shaky breath. 1 month. She had 1 month to determine her future, and perhaps his as well. Mrs. Cooper proved an excellent guide to the sprawling ranch house. The kitchen was modern by frontier standards, with a good stove and ample storage. The dining room and parlor showed signs of gentility, now faded through masculine neglect. Upstairs were 5 bedrooms, the master unused since Jeremiah Reynolds. Death, Samuel's and Matthew's on opposite ends of the hall, Rebecca's guest room, and another kept ready for Dr. Cooper when he occasionally stayed over. "Samuel keeps to himself mostly," Mrs. Cooper explained as they sorted linens. "Takes his breakfast at dawn, dinner at 6 sharp, won't abide tardiness. Matthew's less rigid, often eats with the hands when work demands it." "And my duties?" Rebecca asked. "Beyond the usual cooking and cleaning." Mrs. Cooper folded a sheet with practiced efficiency. "The men respect competence, not fussiness. Keep the house in order, meals on time, supplies accounted for. The ranch books could use a woman's careful eye. Men tend to scrawl without proper columns." "I have experience with accounting," Rebecca offered. "My father's business." "Good. Samuel won't relinquish that duty easily, but Matthew might welcome the help with his horse breeding records. He's got away with animals, breaks the wildest mustangs gentle as kittens. Started raising a special line of stock 3 years back. Keeps his own account separate from the main ranch." Rebecca absorbed this information, mapping the household dynamics in her mind. "And the town? Will I be expected to attend church?" "Sundays, yes. Oakridge isn't much. General store, sheriff's office, saloon. Samuel won't acknowledge exists. Church, schoolhouse that's been without a teacher since Christmas. Small, but folks notice everything." Mrs. Cooper fixed Rebecca with a knowing look. "They'll be mighty curious about you, especially after the wedding was postponed. Prepare yourself for scrutiny." "I'm familiar with scrutiny," Rebecca replied. Dryly, "Boston society excels at it." Mrs. Cooper chuckled. "I'll wager it does. Just remember, out here, a woman is judged by practicality first, piety second, and pedigree hardly at all. Show yourself capable, and most will accept you regardless of age or background." "Most?" Rebecca queried. "Well," Mrs. Cooper tilted, her head meaningfully, "there's always those with their own interests to protect. Eleanor Wilson's had designs on Matthew since her husband passed. Won't take kindly to competition, even temporary." "I'm not competing for anyone's affections," Rebecca clarified. "This is a practical arrangement." Mrs. Cooper's smile held a hint of knowing wisdom. "So you say now, dear. So you say now." The next few days established a rhythm to Rebecca's new life. She rose early, prepared breakfast for the household, spent mornings cleaning and organizing a house too long without a woman's touch, and afternoons learning the complex operations of Evergreen Ranch. Samuel remained coolly civil, speaking to her only when necessary. Mrs. Cooper came daily to assist, but made it clear that Rebecca was now mistress of the household duties. Matthew remained something of a mystery. He treated her with unfailing courtesy, but kept his distance, often leaving before she descended for breakfast, and returning only moments before dinner. Their conversations remained brief, focused on household matters, a roof leak needing attention, supplies to be ordered from town, the quality of meals she prepared. Yet Rebecca occasionally caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher. Not judgmental, not romantic, but intensely observant, as if he was solving a complex equation. On the fifth morning, Rebecca woke to the sound of distant thunder. Rain drummed steadily on the roof as she dressed, choosing a practical brown wool skirt and cream blouse. The house felt different somehow, quieter, as if the weather had muffled the usual creaks and rustlings of the old structure. In the kitchen, she found Matthew already seated at the small work table, a cup of coffee before him, account books spread across the wooden surface. He looked up when she entered, silver hair slightly damp, as if he'd been out in the rain. "Good morning," Rebecca greeted him, trying to hide her surprise at finding him there. "You're usually gone by now." "Rain's too heavy for fence work," he explained, watching as she moved efficiently to stoke the stove. "Thought I'd catch up on these breeding records, unless I'm in your way." "Not at all," she assured him, measuring coffee into the pot. "I'm glad for the company, actually." A comfortable silence fell between them as Rebecca prepared breakfast. Flapjacks, bacon, and stewed apples she'd put up 2 days prior. She was acutely aware of Matthew's presence, the scratch of his pencil against paper, the occasional sigh when figures didn't align. "May I ask what you're working on?" she ventured finally, setting a plate before him. Matthew closed the ledger and accepted, the food with a nod of thanks. "Bloodlines. I've been developing a strain of horses, crossing our quarter horses with Mustangs caught in the high country, trying to create stock with both endurance and temperament." "That sounds fascinating," Rebecca said, genuinely interested. "Is it proving successful?" Something in Matthew's face opened at her question, a warmth that transformed his features from merely handsome to genuinely compelling. "It is, actually. 3 years of selective breeding. The foals take the best qualities of both lines, Mustang hardiness, quarter horse trainability." Pride colored his voice. "We've got a mare due to foal any day now, most promising match yet." Rebecca sat across from him with her own plate, drawn in by his enthusiasm. "You sound like my father discussing a particularly exciting manuscript." "That same passion," Matthew's expression turned curious. "Tell me about him, your father." "Philip Taylor," Rebecca smiled fondly. "A brilliant editor with terrible business sense. He could spot literary genius in a jumble of words, but couldn't balance account books to save his life. That fell to me after my mother died. How old were you then? 14. Old enough to learn household management, too young to understand how precarious our situation had become. She sipped her coffee, surprised at how easily the words came. Father believed success was always just one book away. The next Milton, the next Dickens. He died still believing that perhaps it was a mercy. Matthew studied her, his expression thoughtful. And you? What did you believe? The question caught her off guard with its perceptiveness. I believed in preparing for the world as it is, not as we wish it to be, she answered after a moment, though I kept that opinion largely to myself. A practical woman, Matthew nodded, as your letters suggested. Rebecca set down her fork, suddenly needing to clarify something. Mr. Reynolds, Matthew, I may be practical, but I don't lack appreciation for beauty or passion. I simply learned early that dreams require a foundation of security to flourish. His eyes held hers steadily. I never assumed otherwise, Rebecca. The sound of her given name in his deep voice sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. Before she could respond, the back door flew open, admitting a drenched ranch hand. Mr. Matthew, the young man gasped. That paint mare, she's foaling, but something ain't right. Matthew was on his feet instantly, all traces of relaxed conversation vanishing. Breach? Looks that way. Doc Cooper's over at the Miller place for a birthing. Won't be back till evening. Matthew grabbed his coat from a hook by the door. Get Jacob and meet me at the stable. We'll need to turn her. The hand disappeared. Back into the rain. Matthew paused at the door, glancing back at Rebecca with an apologetic expression. I'm sorry to cut breakfast short. Is there anything I can do to help? She asked, rising from her chair. Surprise flickered across his face, quickly replaced by consideration. Have you any experience with difficult births? Not with horses, Rebecca admitted, but I assisted our housekeeper when her daughter delivered a breech baby. I understand the principle. Matthew hesitated only briefly. Another pair of hands could make the difference. If you're willing. Of course, Rebecca said firmly, already reaching for her shawl. The rain soaked them both within moments as they hurried across the muddy yard to the stables. Inside, lanterns cast golden light over the scene. A beautiful paint mare lying on her side in a stall, sides heaving, eyes rolling white with distress. Two ranch hands knelt beside her, their expressions grim. Matthew moved with quiet authority to the mare's head, murmuring soothing words as he stroked her neck. How long has she been laboring, Jacob? Found her down when I came on at 5. The older hand replied. Back legs showing, but no progress in the last hour. Matthew nodded, already rolling up his sleeves. She's exhausted. We need to get in there and turn the foal before we lose them both. He glanced up at Rebecca, who stood at the stall entrance. This will get difficult. Last chance to return to the house. Rebecca met his gaze, then deliberately rolled up her own sleeves. I'm staying. Tell me what to do. For the next hour, Rebecca followed Matthew's calm instructions, holding the mare steady, fetching clean water, supporting limbs as Matthew worked with gentle determination to reposition the foal inside the laboring mare. His hands were surprisingly gentle for their size and strength, his voice a constant stream of encouragement, both to the suffering animal and to Rebecca herself. That's it, he murmured. You're doing beautifully, both of you. When the foal finally slid into the world, a wet, gangly miracle with a perfect white star on its forehead, Rebecca found herself blinking back unexpected tears. The miracle of life, even in a rain-soaked stable on a remote Montana ranch, held undeniable power. Matthew's face, when he finally sat back on his heels, showed exhausted triumph. He watched the mare nuzzle her newborn, a rare, unguarded smile transforming his features. "A colt," he said softly. "Strong legs, perfect markings." His eyes found Rebecca's. We didn't lose either of them. The simple "we" warmed her more than any elaborate compliment could have. She smiled back, acutely aware of her bedraggled appearance. Hair escaping its pins, dress mud-splattered, hands raw from work, yet feeling strangely exhilarated. "He's beautiful," she said, watching the foal struggle to find his feet. "Does he have a name?" Matthew considered the colt, head tilted. Tempest, born in storm and struggle. His gaze returned to Rebecca, something new in his expression. "What do you think?" "Tempest," she repeated, testing the name. "It suits him perfectly." They remained like that, kneeling in the straw, watching new life unfold, connected by shared effort and the quiet understanding that something had shifted between them. A barrier lowered, however slightly. Later, as they walked back through the now gentle rain toward the house, Matthew stopped suddenly. "Thank you," he said simply. "Your help made the difference today." Rebecca shook her head. "You would have managed. You knew exactly what to do." "Perhaps," he acknowledged, "but having you there," he hesitated, searching for words. "It mattered." Their eyes held in the grey morning light. Rebecca felt a peculiar breathlessness that had nothing to do with physical exertion. "Mr. Reynolds! Miss Taylor!" Tommy's voice broke the moment. The boy ran toward them from the house. "Mr. Samuels, looking for you both. Says there's trouble." The trouble proved to be a telegraph message from town. The spring rains had swollen Cedar Creek beyond its banks, washing out the bridge connecting Evergreen Ranch to Oakridge. For at least a week, the ranch would be effectively isolated. Samuel paced the study, irritation evident in every line of his body. "Supplies will run short. We needed flour, sugar, and salt from Jennings' store, and Pastor Miller can't reach us for Sunday services. We have enough provisions to manage," Matthew pointed out reasonably. "The creek will recede." Samuel shot him a sharp look. "That's not the point. We're cut off. And what of Miss Taylor's situation? People will talk." Rebecca, who had changed into a dry dress, but whose hair still hung damp down her back, spoke up from the doorway. "Mr. Reynolds, I assure you my reputation is not so fragile that a washed-out bridge will destroy it." Samuel turned to her, seeming to truly look at her for the first time since her arrival. "You're soaked through. Were you out in this downpour?" "Miss Taylor assisted with the paint mare's foaling," Matthew explained before she could answer. "A difficult birth. She was instrumental in saving both mare and foal." Surprise registered on Samuel's face, followed by a reassessment so obvious Rebecca almost smiled. He hadn't expected practical skills from a Boston bluestocking. "Is that so?" Samuel said finally. "Well, that's commendable." "Rebecca has many talents," Matthew added, the use of her given name clearly deliberate. "I suspect we've only begun to discover them." Samuel's eyes narrowed slightly, glancing between them with new speculation. "Indeed. Well, Miss Taylor, since we're to be isolated for some days, perhaps you might review the household stores. Ensure we're making efficient use of what we have." "Of course," Rebecca replied, recognizing the olive branch for what it was. "I'll prepare an inventory this afternoon." Samuel nodded once, then returned to his desk, dismissal clear. Rebecca turned to go, but Matthew followed her into the hallway, speaking quietly when they were beyond his brother's hearing. "Samuel doesn't offer trust easily," he said. "You've impressed him." Rebecca smiled slightly. "I didn't do it for his approval." "I know." Matthew's expression grew thoughtful. "That's precisely why it worked." The washed-out bridge created an unexpected intimacy at Evergreen Ranch. Without regular traffic to and from town, the household turned inward, establishing new rhythms. Rebecca found herself with more opportunities to observe Matthew in his natural element. working with horses, managing ranch hands, even playing chess in the evenings by lamplight. 3 days after the foaling incident, Rebecca was hanging laundry in the unexpected sunshine when she noticed Matthew in the corral with a spirited black horse. The animal pranced nervously, tossing its head, clearly distrustful. Yet Matthew showed no fear, standing relaxed in the center of the enclosure, speaking words she couldn't hear from this distance. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the horse settled, still. Wary but no longer panicked, Matthew extended his hand, palm flat. Minutes passed. Then remarkably the horse stepped forward, nostrils flaring as it caught Matthew's scent. Contact, the velvety muzzle against calloused palm. Rebecca found herself holding her breath, witnessing something that felt almost sacred in its quiet triumph. When Matthew finally looked up and saw her watching, his smile held no artifice, just simple joy in sharing the moment with someone who might understand its significance. He beckoned her over. Rebecca hesitated, then set down her laundry basket and approached the corral fence. "This is midnight," Matthew said softly, still maintaining contact with the horse. "Caught him 3 weeks ago in the high country. Everyone said he's too wild to gentle." The horse's dark coat gleamed in the sunlight, muscles rippling beneath as he shifted nervously at Rebecca's approach. "He's magnificent," she said truthfully. Matthew nodded, pride evident. "Watch how he moves, perfect conformation, strong chest. He'll pass those qualities to his offspring." He stroked the animal's neck slowly. "The trick is patience, understanding. Most men try to break a horse's spirit. I prefer to earn its trust. Like people," Rebecca observed. Matthew's eyes met hers over the horse's withers. "Yes," he said simply. "Exactly like people." Later that evening, after dinner had been cleared and Samuel had retreated to his study, Rebecca found herself alone with Matthew in the parlor. He sat near the fireplace, a book open on his knee, silver hair catching golden highlights from the flames. She hesitated in the doorway, suddenly unsure of her welcome despite the growing ease between them. He looked up, sensing her presence. "Please join me," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite. "Unless you're retiring already?" "No." Rebecca entered the room, carrying her own book. "I thought I might read for a while." Matthew glanced at the volume in her hands. "Wordsworth." Rebecca nodded, a bit self-conscious. "Poetry has always been a comfort, especially away from home." "Are you homesick for Boston?" he asked, his tone genuinely interested. She considered the question carefully. Not for Boston itself, perhaps, but for familiarity. The certainty of knowing my place, even if that place was diminishing. She settled into the chair, smoothing her skirts. "What are you reading?" He turned his book to show her the cover. "Darwin. Controversial, I know, but fascinating observations about natural adaptation." Rebecca's eyebrows rose in surprise. A Montana rancher reading evolutionary theory had not featured in her expectations. Matthew caught her expression and chuckled, shocked that a frontier cowboy can comprehend scientific thought. "Not at all," she corrected quickly. "Just pleased to discover intellectual curiosity where I didn't necessarily expect it." "My father believed education wasn't just for city folk," Matthew explained. "He may have ruled with an iron hand, but he made sure his sons could think beyond the confines of this valley." His expression turned thoughtful, though Samuel took more to business principles than philosophical ones. "And you," Rebecca asked, "what captured your interest beyond ranching?" "Natural sciences, animal behavior, the patterns that explain why creatures, humans included, act as they do." His eyes held hers. "We're not so different from the horses I train in some ways. Driven by instinct, experience, the need for both freedom and connection." The insight revealed depths to Matthew Reynolds that Rebecca hadn't anticipated. This man was no simple rancher, but a thinker, An observer. Someone who might understand her own complex relationship with duty and desire. "What brought you to answering a mail-order bride advertisement?" Matthew asked suddenly. The true reason, beyond practical necessity. The directness of the question startled her, but Rebecca found herself wanting to offer honesty in exchange for his unexpected openness. "Fear," she admitted quietly, "not just of poverty, though that was real enough. Fear of invisibility. In Boston, I'd become transparent, a spinster daughter, useful but unremarkable. At least here, I thought, I might matter to someone, even if only as a practical arrangement." She looked down at her hands. "It sounds pathetic," said aloud. "Not pathetic," Matthew countered gently. "Human. We all need to be seen, Rebecca. Truly seen." The way he said her name, as if it carried weight, substance, made her look up. His expression held no pity, only understanding. "And you?" she asked, finding courage. "Why has the silver-haired horse whisperer of Evergreen Ranch remained unmarried all these years? Surely not for lack of opportunity." A shadow crossed his face. "No, not for lack of opportunity." He was silent for a long moment, gaze turning to the fire. "I was engaged once, 20 years ago. Catherine Spencer, daughter of a neighboring rancher. We'd grown up together, expected to marry since childhood." Rebecca waited, sensing the story held pain. "She died," Matthew said finally. "Influenza, 3 weeks before our wedding day." His eyes remained on the flames. "My hair turned silver that winter. Doctors called it shock, when it didn't change. Back I took it as a reminder. Life alters us in ways we can't control." "I'm so sorry," Rebecca said softly. Matthew looked up, his expression not broken, but weathered, like landscape shaped by elements. "It was half a lifetime ago, but it taught me something. Marriage should be more than convenience or expectation. It should be choice, freely made." The understanding between them deepened in that moment. Two people shaped by loss, driven by practicality, but harboring deeper yearnings, neither fully acknowledged. "And yet here you are," Rebecca observed gently, "considering a marriage largely arranged for you." "Here I am," Matthew agreed, a hint of his earlier smile returning. "Though the arrangement keeps changing, doesn't it?" Before Rebecca could respond, a tremendous crash of thunder shook the house, making her start. Outside, rain began again in earnest, drumming against the windows. "The creek will rise further," Matthew noted. "We may be isolated longer than Samuel anticipated." "Does that concern you?" Rebecca asked, searching his face. Matthew considered her question, the firelight casting his features in warm relief against the darkness of the room. "No," he said finally. "I find I don't mind being cut off from town nearly as much as I expected to." The simple statement carried layers of meaning neither was quite ready to articulate. Instead, they returned to their books, reading in companionable silence as the storm raged outside, and something quiet and hopeful grew in the space between them. By the end of the week, the rain had finally ceased, though Cedar Creek remained too swollen for safe crossing. The enforced isolation had changed the household dynamics in subtle ways. Samuel, finding Rebecca's inventory and rationing suggestions impressively thorough, had begun consulting her about other household accounts. Mrs. Cooper, visiting less frequently due to the difficult crossing upstream, had nevertheless noted the gradual warming between Matthew and Rebecca with quiet approval. And Matthew himself had begun seeking Rebecca's company more openly, inviting her to observe his work with the horses, engaging her in conversations about books and ideas in the evenings, even asking her opinion about ranch matters Samuel would have considered beyond a woman's province. On Sunday morning, with no possibility of church services, Rebecca was surprised when Matthew suggested a ride to show her more of the ranch property. If you're comfortable on horseback, he added. I know many Eastern ladies aren't accustomed to Western riding. My riding lessons were one of the few luxuries my father insisted upon preserving even after our circumstances changed, Rebecca assured him. Though I make no claims to expert horsemanship, Matthew smiled. I think I can find a mount gentle enough for even the most cautious rider. An hour later, they set out from the stables, Matthew on his favored bay gelding, Rebecca on a sweet-tempered chestnut mare. The morning air held the freshness that only follows days of rain, scented with pine and wildflowers beginning to bloom across the valley. They rode at a leisurely pace, Matthew pointing out landmarks and boundaries, sharing stories of the ranch's history. My grandfather claimed this land in '42, he explained as they crested a small rise. Built the first cabin with his own hands, slept with a rifle across his chest for the first year. Were there hostile tribes in the area? Rebecca asked. Matthew shook his head. Not hostile so much as rightfully suspicious of white settlers encroaching on their hunting grounds. My grandfather was fortunate. He encountered a Blackfoot leader willing to negotiate rather than fight. They reached an understanding that allowed both to live in relative peace. That's not the version of Western settlement I read in Boston. Newspapers, Rebecca observed. Most Eastern papers prefer simpler narratives, Matthew replied. The reality out here has always been more complex. Cooperation has saved as many lives as conflict has claimed, though those stories rarely make for exciting headlines. They continued riding, crossing streams swollen with snowmelt, passing groves of aspen trees just beginning to unfurl tender green leaves. Matthew proved a knowledgeable guide, pointing out medicinal plants, signs of wildlife, the distant mountains, whose snow-capped peaks fed the ranch's water supply. When they reached a high meadow carpeted with early wildflowers, Matthew suggested they stop to rest the horses. He helped Rebecca dismount, his hands strong and sure at her waist, lingering perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary. The awareness between them, physical, undeniable, hummed in the small space between their bodies before he stepped back. It's beautiful, Rebecca said, gazing across the meadow to the valley beyond. From this elevation, all of Evergreen Ranch was visible. The main house, outbuildings, grazing lands and forests stretching toward distant mountains. This is my favorite view, Matthew admitted, standing beside her. When ranch decisions weigh heavily or Samuel and I are at odds, I come here to remember what we're working for. It's worth working for, Rebecca said softly. All of it. Matthew turned to study her face, his expression thoughtful. 2 weeks ago, I resented Samuel's arrangement, bringing a stranger into our home, expecting me to marry without choice or compatibility. Rebecca's heart quickened. And now I find myself grateful for his high-handedness, though I'll never admit that to his face. Matthew's eyes held hers steadily. You're nothing like I expected, Rebecca Taylor. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? She asked, striving for lightness despite the tremor in her voice. Decidedly good, he answered without hesitation. You're practical without being cold, educated without being pretentious, strong without being hard. He took a half step closer. I find myself wondering if Samuel's 1-month deadline might be overly generous. Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. Matthew, are you saying... The distant sound of hoofbeats interrupted whatever might have followed. Both turned to see a rider approaching at speed across the lower meadow. Tommy, the young ranch hand, his horse lathered with exertion. Something's wrong, Matthew said, immediately alert. He raised an arm, signaling their position to the approaching rider. Tommy reined in his mount, breathing hard. Mr. Matthew, the creek's gone down enough to cross. Dr. Cooper sent me. It's Mr. Samuel. He took a bad fall inspecting the south barn roof. Doc says it's his leg, broken real bad. Matthew was already moving toward his horse. How long ago? About an hour, sir. I rode straight here after Doc told me where to find you." Matthew helped Rebecca mount quickly, his movements efficient but gentle despite the urgency. "We'll return immediately," he told Tommy. "Ride ahead and tell Dr. Cooper we're coming." The ride back to the ranch passed in tense silence, Matthew setting a pace that challenged Rebecca's riding abilities but never exceeded them. His face had settled into grim lines, concern for his brother evident in every taut muscle. They found Samuel in his bedroom, Dr. Cooper at his side. The older Reynolds brother lay pale against the pillows, his right leg splinted and elevated, jaw clenched against obvious pain. Mrs. Cooper hovered nearby, linens and bandages in her arms. "What happened?" Matthew demanded, striding to his brother's bedside. Dr. Cooper, a weathered man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, answered while checking Samuel's pulse. "Slipped on wet shingles, fell nearly 20 feet. Compound fracture of the right tibia, 3 broken ribs, and a concussion. He's fortunate it wasn't worse." Samuel opened pain-glazed eyes. "Hardly feels fortunate," he muttered through clenched teeth. "You had no business on that roof after a week of rain," Matthew admonished, though his tone held more worry than reproach. "Someone had to check for damage," Samuel retorted weakly. "You were otherwise occupied." His gaze slid briefly to Rebecca, who stood in the doorway. Dr. Cooper administered laudanum for the pain, then drew Matthew aside while Mrs. Cooper adjusted Samuel's pillows. Rebecca followed, sensing the conversation concerned the household. She now helped manage. "He'll need complete bed rest for at least 6 weeks," the doctor said quietly. "The bone was protruding through the skin. I've set it as best I can, but healing will be slow and painful. He cannot put weight on that leg. And those ribs need time too. He's not to conduct ranch business or exert himself in any way." Matthew ran a hand through his silver hair. "He won't accept that easily. He has no choice," Dr. Cooper stated firmly. "If he attempts to resume normal activities too soon, he risks permanent lameness or worse. I've told him as much, though I doubt. He fully comprehends in his current state. I'll ensure he follows your instructions," Rebecca said with quiet authority, surprising both men. Dr. Cooper's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded with approval. "Good. He'll need regular doses of willow bark tea for pain and fever clean. Bandages, proper nutrition. The first week is critical for preventing infection." "I nursed my father through his final illness," Rebecca assured him. "I understand what's required." "And the ranch?" Dr. Cooper asked, turning back to Matthew. A weary sigh escaped him. "I'll manage both Samuel's responsibilities and my own. Spring roundup is approaching. We're already short-handed even with Samuel healthy." Rebecca touched his arm lightly. "Focus on what only you can do. I'll handle the household, Samuel's care, and any paperwork or accounts that don't require specialized knowledge." Gratitude flickered in Matthew's eyes. "Thank you," he said simply, covering her hand with his own for a brief moment. Dr. Cooper observed this exchange with interest, but commented only on Samuel's medical needs before taking his leave, promising to return in 3 days to check the wound. The weeks that followed tested everyone at Evergreen Ranch. Samuel proved a difficult patient, frustrated by immobility, resentful of dependence, and initially resistant to Rebecca's authority in the sick room. Yet her quiet competence gradually wore down his objections. She administered his medications without fuss, changed bandages efficiently, and most importantly, kept him informed of ranch operations without burdening him with decisions he couldn't make from his bed. Matthew, meanwhile, shouldered the double weight of ranch management during their busiest season. He rose before dawn and often returned after dark, exhaustion etched in the lines around his eyes. Yet each evening, no matter how late, he made time to visit Samuel's room, where Rebecca was usually sitting with ledgers or mending, to report on the day's progress and seek advice when needed. These brief interactions, sometimes only minutes before one or both of them succumbed to fatigue, deepened their connection in ways neither had anticipated. There was an intimacy and shared responsibility, in wordless understanding of each other's burdens, in the grateful glances when one anticipated the other's needs. Samuel, confined to his bed and groggy with pain remedies, observed these exchanges with increasing awareness. 3 weeks into his convalescence, when Rebecca had left to prepare dinner, he broached the subject with his brother. "You look at her differently now," Samuel stated without preamble. Matthew, who had been describing the successful branding of the spring calves, paused. "Miss Taylor has proven herself invaluable during your recovery." "That's not what I meant, and you know it." Despite his weakened state, Samuel's perception remained sharp. "The month is nearly up, Matthew. Have you made your decision?" Matthew studied his brother thoughtfully. "I believe that decision now involves 3 people, not just my preference, or your arrangement." "She'll accept you," Samuel said with certainty. "Any woman with sense would. The question is whether you'll finally stop fighting what's plainly good for you." "I stopped fighting that particular battle some time ago," Matthew admitted quietly. "But circumstances have changed. With your injury, my injury changes nothing," Samuel interrupted firmly. "If anything, it proves how desperately this ranch needs a proper mistress. Miss Taylor has managed both my care and household affairs with remarkable efficiency. Imagine what she could accomplish as a permanent fixture." "She's more than a convenient solution to our problems, Sam," Matthew said, a hint of warning in his tone. Samuel's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "You care for her, more than I anticipated." Matthew didn't deny it. "She deserves better than a marriage born of practicality or a husband who spends 16 hours daily with cattle and ledgers." "Then give her better," Samuel challenged. "You've always been the idealist between us, Matt. But even idealists must eventually act on their convictions." The conversation lingered in Matthew's mind as he conducted the evening inspection of the barn. The ranch had somehow survived the crisis of Samuel's accident, largely due to Rebecca's unexpected contributions. She had seamlessly adapted to each new challenge, reorganizing the household to accommodate Samuel's needs while ensuring Matthew could focus on the demanding spring work. More than that, she had begun making her own mark on Evergreen Ranch. The household ran more efficiently than it had in years. The account books were immaculate. She had even started a small kitchen garden with herbs and vegetables, insisting that fresh produce would speed Samuel's recovery. And in the rare moments they found themselves alone, usually late evenings when Samuel had already drifted to sleep, she and Matthew had continued building something neither had explicitly named, but both increasingly valued. They spoke of books, shared childhood memories, exchanged views on everything from politics to poetry. He found himself seeking her opinions on ranch matters, not out of courtesy, but genuine respect for her insight. The promised month had indeed nearly expired. Soon, according to their agreement, Rebecca would either become his wife or leave Evergreen Ranch with compensation for her work. The thought of her departure created a physical ache Matthew could no longer ignore. The next morning, he made a decision. After completing the most urgent ranch tasks, he rode to town for the first time since Samuel's accident. His first stop was the bank, where he withdrew funds from his personal account. The second was the small jewelry shop on Oakridge's Main Street. Mr. Hoffman, the elderly German jeweler, smiled in recognition as the bell above his door announced Matthew's entrance. "Herr Reynolds, a rare pleasure. What brings you to my humble establishment?" Matthew removed his hat, suddenly feeling uncharacteristically nervous. "I'm looking for a ring, Mr. Hoffman. An engagement ring." The jeweler's bushy eyebrows rose dramatically. "Indeed, this is most interesting news. For the Boston lady staying at your ranch, perhaps?" Of course, the town already knew about Rebecca. In Oakridge, information traveled faster than the weekly mail coach. "Perhaps," Matthew acknowledged non-committally. "I'd like to see what you have available." Mr. Hoffman brought out a tray of rings, most fairly simple by Eastern standards, but representing the best frontier craftsmanship. Matthew examined them carefully, finding none that seemed quite right for Rebecca's elegant hands and practical nature. "Nothing suitable?" the jeweler asked, noting his hesitation. "They're fine work," Matthew assured him. "Just not quite reflecting the lady's character," Mr. Hoffman finished knowingly. "One moment, please." He disappeared into his back room, returning with a small velvet box. "This piece came from back east last month. I ordered it for Mrs. Whitaker, but she has since decided on another design. Perhaps it will speak to you." The ring inside was unlike the others. A deep blue sapphire surrounded by small diamonds in a delicate silver setting. Not ostentatious, but undeniably beautiful, with a quiet elegance that immediately reminded Matthew of Rebecca. "It's perfect," he said simply. Mr. Hoffman nodded in satisfaction. "Sapphire represents wisdom and nobility of spirit. Very fitting for an educated lady, yes?" Matthew paid a sum that would have made Samuel wince had he known, but he didn't. Regretted for a moment. The ring safe in his pocket, he made one final stop, Pastor Miller's modest home beside the church. The pastor welcomed him warmly, though his expression registered surprise at Matthew's unusual visit. After preliminary pleasantries, Matthew stated his purpose directly. "I'd like to discuss a wedding ceremony," he said. "Provided the lady accepts." "Of course." Pastor Miller's face brightened. "Miss Taylor, I presume. Excellent news. The congregation has been most curious about the postponed ceremony. When would you like to proceed?" "That depends," Matthew replied. "I haven't actually asked her yet." The pastor's smile turned understanding. "Ah, so this is a preliminary inquiry. Well, with Samuel's condition, I assume you'd prefer a small ceremony at the ranch rather than in town." "Actually," Matthew said slowly, an idea forming, "I had something different in mind, if you're amenable." When Matthew returned to Evergreen Ranch that afternoon, he found Rebecca in the kitchen garden, kneeling among neat rows of young plants, a wide-brimmed hat protecting her fair skin from the Montana sun. She looked up at his approach, a smile of genuine pleasure lighting her face. "You're back earlier than expected," she observed, rising and brushing soil from her hands. "How was town?" "Unchanged," he replied, suddenly acutely aware of the ring box in his pocket and the weightiness of his intentions. "How is Samuel today?" "Irritable, but improving," Rebecca reported. "Dr. Cooper visited this morning and says the bone is knitting. Well, no sign of infection." "Good news," Matthew nodded. "And you? How are you faring with all these added responsibilities?" Rebecca tilted her head slightly, studying him. "I'm managing quite well, actually." "Is something troubling you, Matthew? You seem preoccupied." His directness had always been one of the qualities he most appreciated about her. Now it left him no space for hesitation or retreat. "I wondered if you might accompany me on a ride." "Oh, tomorrow morning," he said. "There's something I'd like to show you before—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Before we need to discuss the terms of our arrangement." Understanding dawned in her eyes. Their month was ending. Decisions loomed. "Of course," she agreed quietly. "Samuel should be fine for a few hours, especially with Mrs. Cooper coming to help." "I'll have the horses ready at 7, Matthew said, resisting the urge to say more. Some conversations deserved their proper moment. That night, sleep eluded him. Matthew stood at his bedroom window, watching moonlight silver the landscape in a way that reminded him of how Rebecca had once described his hair, like moonlight on water. The comparison had pleased him, coming from her lips. Tomorrow would change everything one way or another. He had prepared for the possibility of rejection, though hope burned stronger with each passing day. Whatever her answer, he had to offer her the truth, not just the practical partnership originally proposed, but everything his heart now yearned to give. Dawn broke clear and perfect, the spring air crisp with possibility. Matthew had the horses saddled and waiting when Rebecca emerged from the house, dressed in a riding skirt of deep blue that complemented her eyes. Her hair was braided simply down her back, practical for riding yet undeniably feminine. "Good morning," she greeted him, her smile slightly tentative. "Where are we going today?" "It's a surprise," Matthew replied, helping her mount the chestnut mare she had come to favor. "But I think you'll approve." They rode at an easy pace through meadows, now lush with spring growth. Wildflowers dotted the landscape in vibrant patches of color: purple lupine, orange paintbrush, yellow balsam root. As they crested a hill Rebecca hadn't visited before, a new vista opened before them. A small, pristine lake nestled in a natural bowl of land, its surface reflecting the mountain peaks beyond. "I had no idea this was here," Rebecca breathed, clearly enchanted by the unexpected beauty. "Few people know about it," Matthew explained as they dismounted at the lake's edge. "It's part of Evergreen Ranch, but lies beyond our usual grazing lands. My grandfather discovered it when tracking a wounded elk. He called it Grace Lake. It's beautiful," Rebecca said, walking to the shoreline where wildflowers grew right to the water's edge. Matthew followed, the ring box a comforting weight in his pocket, its presence giving him courage for what came next. "Rebecca," he began, his voice steadier than he felt. "Our arrangement stipulated a month for you to work as our housekeeper, before either proceeding with marriage or departing with compensation." She turned to face him, expression carefully composed. "Yes, that month ends tomorrow." "That was before Samuel's accident changed our circumstances," Matthew continued. "Before I truly knew you, your character, your intelligence, your strength." A flush touched Rebecca's cheeks, but she maintained eye contact. "The circumstances have indeed changed." "They have," Matthew agreed, "which is why I can no longer honor our original arrangement." Hurt flashed briefly in her eyes before she controlled it, squaring her shoulders slightly. "I see. Of course, with Samuel's condition, taking on a wife would be an added complication." "No," Matthew interrupted gently, taking a step closer. "You misunderstand me. I cannot honor an arrangement based solely on practicality and convenience, when what I feel for you has become something else entirely." Rebecca went very still, hope and caution warring in her expression. "What are you saying, Matthew?" He took her hand, his heart pounding, but his purpose clear. "I'm saying that I no longer wish to marry you because it's practical or expected or arranged. I wish to marry you because these weeks have shown me a woman of extraordinary quality, intelligent, compassionate, resilient, a woman I've come to admire deeply." He paused, gathering courage for complete honesty. "A woman I've come to love." The word hung between them, powerful in its simplicity. Rebecca's eyes widened, lips parting slightly in surprise. "Love?" she whispered, as if testing the word's reality. "Yes, love," Matthew confirmed, his voice growing stronger with certainty. "Something I never expected to feel again. Something I certainly never expected to find through my brother's high-handed matchmaking." A smile trembled on Rebecca's lips. Life does take unexpected turns. Indeed it does. Matthew reached into his pocket and withdrew the small velvet box. "Which is why I'm asking you, not as part of any arrangement or practical consideration, but as a man who has found his heart awakened again, will you marry me, Rebecca Taylor? Not because you need security or because I need a wife, but because we've found something worth building a life around." He opened the box, revealing the sapphire ring catching morning light. Rebecca's breath caught. For a long moment, she stared at the ring, then raised her eyes to his face, searching for something, sincerity perhaps, or certainty. Whatever she sought, she seemed to find it, for her expression softened into radiant joy. "Yes," she said, simply. "Yes, I will marry you, Matthew Reynolds." He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, as if destined. Then, with surprising gentleness for a man who broke wild horses, he drew her into his arms and kissed her. Their first kiss, tender but fervent, sealing promises both spoken and unspoken. When they finally parted, Rebecca's eyes were bright, with unshed tears. "I never imagined this," she confessed softly. "When I stepped off that train, 28 and unwanted, I hoped at best for respect and security. Love seemed an impossible luxury." "Sometimes the things we don't seek find us anyway," Matthew said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I have one more surprise, if you're willing." Curiosity lit her eyes. "Another surprise? You've already exceeded all expectations, Matthew." He smiled, enjoying the sound of his name on her lips. "This morning, I spoke with Pastor Miller. He's willing to perform our ceremony here at Grace Lake, rather than in the church or at the ranch. Just us, the pastor, and perhaps Mrs. Cooper, and the doctor as witnesses. Here," Rebecca looked around at the pristine setting. "It's perfect, but what about Samuel? He can't travel in his condition." "Samuel will understand," Matthew assured her. "He wants this marriage more than either of us initially did, remember? We'll have a small celebration at the ranch afterward, so he can participate." Rebecca considered this, then nodded. "When?" "Pastor Miller could come tomorrow, if that suits you," Matthew said. "Unless you wish for more time to prepare." Rebecca's laugh, a sound he had come to treasure, rang out across the peaceful lake. "Matthew Reynolds, I have waited 28 years to find a man who sees me truly. I have no desire to wait a moment longer than necessary." Their return journey to Evergreen Ranch was filled with plans and possibilities. Rebecca, practical even in joy, raised sensible questions about household arrangements with Samuel's recovery, the coming summer work, living quarters. Matthew answered each consideration thoughtfully, but couldn't stop smiling at the way sunlight caught the sapphire on her hand as she gestured. Samuel received their news with satisfaction poorly disguised, as grudging approval. "Well, it's about time," he grumbled from his bed. "Though I suppose now I'll never hear the end of how right I was to arrange this match." "You were right, Sam," Matthew conceded with good humor, "though not in the way you expected." Mrs. Cooper, arriving to help with Samuel's care, wept happy, tears upon seeing the ring and hearing of the lakeside ceremony planned for the following day. "I knew it," she declared. "I told Dr. Cooper weeks ago that you two had the look about you. Wait until the town hears that the mail-order bride deemed too old at 28 has captured the heart of Evergreen Ranch's silver-haired horse whisperer." Rebecca blushed at this characterization, but Matthew merely took her hand, a gesture that was becoming delightfully habitual. "Age is meaningless when you find the right person," he said simply. That evening, after Samuel had been settled for the night and Mrs. Cooper had departed with promises to return for the ceremony, Matthew and Rebecca sat together on the porch swing, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. His arm rested comfortably around her shoulders. Her head leaned against him with a naturalness that belied how recently they had acknowledged their feelings. "Are you certain about tomorrow?" Matthew asked softly. "It's not too rushed." Rebecca turned slightly to look up at him. "Do you know what convinced me to answer your brother's advertisement? Beyond necessity, I mean." Matthew shook his head, curious. "It was a line in his letter describing the man seeking a wife. A gentleman of mature character who values practical intelligence above youthful beauty. I thought anyone who phrased A matrimonial request that way might see beyond my age to who I truly am." She smiled slightly. "Of course, I later learned you hadn't written or approved those words." "Sam has occasional moments of insight," Matthew acknowledged wryly. "Indeed, but what he wrote accidentally proved true. You do see me, Matthew, not as an aging spinster or a convenient solution, but as a woman of value and capability." She reached up to touch his silver hair, a gesture of tenderness that made his heart swell. "Just as I see you, not as an odd bachelor with prematurely silver hair, but as a man of depth and gentle strength. To being truly seen," Matthew murmured, leaning down to kiss her softly. "To unexpected blessings," Rebecca whispered against his lips, "and mail-order arrangements that somehow, against all odds, deliver precisely what the heart truly needs." Grace Lake shimmered in morning light, its surface rippling gently with the spring breeze. Wildflowers nodded along the shoreline, nature's own wedding decorations, more perfect than any human hand could arrange. Pastor Miller stood near the water's edge, Bible in hand, his expression one of genuine pleasure as he awaited the bride's arrival. Matthew had ridden ahead with the pastor, and Dr. Cooper, wanting to ensure everything was prepared. Now he stood watching the path where Rebecca would appear, accompanied by Mrs. Cooper. His silver hair caught the sunlight, and for once he felt no self-consciousness about its distinctive appearance. "Nervous?" Dr. Cooper asked quietly, standing at Matthew's side. "Not about marrying her," Matthew replied honestly. "Only about deserving her." The doctor chuckled. "In my experience, that particular concern is the hallmark of a marriage with excellent prospects." Movement on the path drew their attention. Mrs. Cooper appeared first, wearing her Sunday best and carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers. And then, Rebecca. She wore not the altered gown of Samuel's original plan, but a simple dress of deep blue silk that matched her eyes and complemented the sapphire ring on her finger. Her hair was partially up, with soft curls framing her face and the remainder flowing down her back. She carried her own wildflower bouquet, tied with a white ribbon from Mrs. Cooper's sewing basket. Matthew found himself momentarily unable to breathe. She was beautiful, not with the showy prettiness of youth, but with the confident loveliness of a woman who had found her place in the world. Their eyes met across the distance, and Rebecca smiled, a private smile meant only for him. In that moment, Matthew knew with bone-deep certainty that this unexpected marriage would be the greatest blessing of his life. Rebecca's heart fluttered as she approached Matthew across the wildflower meadow, not from nervousness or doubt, but from a happiness so pure and unexpected it seemed almost too fragile to contain. Just weeks ago, she had stepped from a train into what she believed would be a practical arrangement at best, a humiliating rejection at worst. Now she walked toward a man whose silver hair shone in the sunlight, whose eyes held such warmth and promise that it made her breath catch. He extended his hand as she reached him. She placed her fingers in his, feeling the strength and gentleness that had become her anchor in this new world. "You're beautiful," Matthew whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "As are you," she answered, sincerely, for in that moment, with love transforming his weathered features, he was indeed the most handsome man she had ever seen. Pastor Miller cleared his throat gently, bringing their attention to the ceremony at hand. "Dearly beloved," he began, "we are gathered here in this magnificent setting, God's own cathedral, to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The traditional words flowed around them, familiar yet newly meaningful. When the time came for vows, Matthew turned to face Rebecca fully, taking both her hands in his. "Rebecca," he began, his deep voice steady with conviction, "I take you as my wife, not from obligation or arrangement, but from choice and love. I promise to honor your mind as well as your heart, to value your strength alongside your gentleness, to walk beside you rather than ahead or behind. With this ring," he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger to join the sapphire, "I offer not just my name or my protection, but my heart, freely given for all the days we're granted together." Tears shimmered in Rebecca's eyes, but her voice remained clear as she spoke her own vows. "Matthew, I take you as my husband not from necessity or convenience, but from deepest affection and respect. I promise to stand with you through all seasons, to bring warmth to your home and steadiness to your days, to see you always as clearly as you have seen me. With this ring," she placed a matching gold band on his finger, "I bind my life to yours, not as a shelter from loneliness, but as a partnership built on understanding and love." The simple gold band felt right on Matthew's finger. A weight he had never expected to welcome. He barely heard Pastor Miller's concluding words, his attention wholly captured by the woman before him, now his wife in truth as well as name. "You may kiss your bride," the pastor finally announced, his voice warm with approval. Matthew drew Rebecca gently into his arms, one hand cradling her face with exquisite tenderness. Their lips met in a kiss that carried both promise and commitment, not the first flush of youthful passion, but something deeper, stronger. A love built on recognition of true worth, on respect earned through trials overcome together, on the quiet joy of finding connection when neither had been looking for it. Mrs. Cooper sniffled audibly. Dr. Cooper beamed, and somewhere over the mountains, sunlight broke through clouds to cast a golden haze across Grace Lake, nature's own blessing on the union of two souls who had found each other against all expectations. The small wedding party shared a picnic lunch by the lakeside before returning to Evergreen Ranch. Matthew and Rebecca rode side by side, their horses so close their knees occasionally touched, neither willing to increase the distance between them now that all barriers had fallen. "I still can't quite believe it," Rebecca admitted as the ranch buildings came into view. "When I left Boston, marriage seemed a practical necessity. I never dared hope for this." She gestured between them. "This feeling." Matthew reached across to cover her hand with his. "Some of life's greatest gifts come when we've stopped expecting them." Samuel was waiting in the parlor when they arrived, propped up on a special chair Mrs. Cooper had arranged so he could join the small celebration. His expression softened visibly at the sight of them together, Rebecca's hand tucked in Matthew's arm, both wearing matching gold bands that caught the afternoon light. "Well," he said gruffly, "I suppose congratulations are in order." "Yes, they are," Matthew agreed, unable to suppress his smile, "though I doubt you expected things to unfold quite this way when you placed that advertisement." Samuel harumphed. "Results matter more than methods, and the result seems satisfactory to all concerned." His eyes met Rebecca's, a hint of genuine warmth breaking through his usual reserve. "Welcome to the family, Mrs. Reynolds, officially." "Thank you, Samuel," Rebecca replied, the new name still unfamiliar, but welcome on her tongue. "I promise to continue managing your recovery with the same diligence, regardless of my change in status." "I expect nothing less." Samuel nodded, then surprised them both by adding, "You've proven yourself a woman of exceptional quality. This ranch and my brother are fortunate indeed." From Samuel, this constituted effusive praise. Matthew felt a swell of gratitude toward his often difficult brother. For all his high-handedness and rigid expectations, Samuel had inadvertently given him the greatest gift imaginable. Mrs. Cooper had prepared a special dinner to mark the occasion, complete with a small cake decorated with fresh berries and wildflower. "Honey," Dr. Cooper offered a toast, his kind eyes twinkling as he raised his glass. 2 unexpected matches and silver linings, he said meaningfully, with a nod to Matthew's distinctive hair. May your union bring as much healing to this ranch as you've already brought to each other. Later, when the small celebration had concluded, and Samuel had been helped back to his room, Matthew took Rebecca's hand and led her outside as evening settled over the valley. Stars were just beginning to appear, pinpricks of silver against deepening blue. "I have one more wedding gift," he said, guiding her not toward the main house, but toward a smaller structure nearby. A charming cottage set slightly apart from the other buildings, its windows dark and unused. "This was built for my parents when they first married," Matthew explained as they approached. "My father had it constructed so my mother would have her own domain separate from my grandparents in the main house. After they passed, neither Samuel nor I had reason to use it." He opened the door, revealing a cozy interior long closed up, but still containing quality furnishings, draped with dust covers. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. Large windows offered views of the mountains to the west. "I thought—" Matthew hesitated, suddenly uncertain. "I thought perhaps you might like to make this our home, private but still connected to the ranch, your own space to arrange as you wish." Rebecca stepped inside, taking in the graceful proportions, the built-in bookshelves, the potential that lay beneath years of disuse. Emotion welled in her throat. "It's perfect," she whispered, turning to face him. "Absolutely perfect." Relief and pleasure washed across his features. "We can clean it properly tomorrow. Begin moving our things. Make whatever changes you desire." "Our home," Rebecca said softly, testing the words. After years of diminishing circumstances in Boston, of selling her childhood residence piece by piece, the concept of a true home, one shared with a man who valued her completely, seemed almost too precious to grasp. Matthew drew her into his arms, his expression tender in the fading light. "Our home," he confirmed, "our life together, beginning tonight." His kiss held all the promise of that shared future, gentle yet passionate, reverent yet eager. Rebecca leaned into him, her arms encircling his neck, her heart overflowing with emotions too complex for simple naming. They returned to the main house hand in hand, the evening sky now fully darkened to reveal a tapestry of stars above Evergreen Ranch. Tomorrow would bring practical matters, moving their belongings, cleaning the cottage, continuing Samuel's care. But tonight belonged to them alone, a sacred beginning neither had dared imagine possible mere weeks ago. The light of a new day filtered through lace curtains, casting delicate patterns across the bedchamber that now belonged to both Matthew and Rebecca Reynolds. Rebecca woke first, momentarily disoriented before memory returned in a warm rush. The lakeside ceremony, the small celebration, the night that had followed. She turned her head slightly to find Matthew still sleeping beside her, silver hair tousled, his expression peaceful in repose. Her husband. The word still seemed remarkable, both ordinary and extraordinary at once. Careful not to wake him, Rebecca slipped from the bed and moved to the window. Evergreen Ranch spread before her in morning light, cattle grazing in distant fields, ranch hands already at work in the corrals, smoke rising from the bunkhouse chimney. Her home now, not just a place of employment or temporary shelter. "Good morning, Mrs. Reynolds." She turned to find Matthew awake, propped on one elbow, watching her with undisguised admiration. The combination of formal address and intimate gaze brought color to her cheeks. "Good morning, Mr. Reynolds," she replied, unable to suppress a smile. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in years," he answered honestly, extending his hand in invitation. Rebecca returned to the bedside, taking his offered hand and allowing herself to be drawn back to sit beside him. The easy intimacy between them, so recently established, yet already feeling somehow familiar, continued to astonish her. "What does this day hold for us?" she asked, running her fingers lightly through his silver hair. "First breakfast," Matthew said practically, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "Then perhaps we might begin preparing the cottage. Samuel will need checking, of course, and I must meet with the foreman about the north pasture rotation." "So life continues," Rebecca observed, "but differently now." "Immeasurably differently," Matthew agreed, his expression growing serious. "Rebecca, I want you to know that while my responsibilities to the ranch remain demanding, you will never be secondary in my life. What we've found together," he squeezed her hand gently, "is the foundation everything else rests upon." The sincerity in his voice touched her deeply. This was no empty romantic declaration, but a genuine commitment from a man who understood the weight of promises made. "I understand the demands of Evergreen Ranch," she assured him. "I don't expect or want you to neglect your responsibilities. We'll find our balance together." His smile returned, warming his eyes. "Have I mentioned how fortunate I am to have married such a sensible woman?" "Sensible, perhaps," Rebecca acknowledged with a small smile of her own, "but no longer practical, to a fault. You've awakened other aspects of my nature, Matthew Reynolds." "Have I indeed?" he murmured, drawing her closer. "Perhaps breakfast can wait a little longer." Later, as they shared coffee and Mrs. Cooper's freshly baked bread in the kitchen, they outlined plans for the cottage. Rebecca's practical nature emerged in organized lists of necessary supplies and tasks, while Matthew contributed knowledge of local resources and craftsmen who might assist with specific projects. "The bookshelves need only refinishing, not replacing," Rebecca noted, mentally cataloging her small collection of beloved volumes that would soon find a proper home. "And the fireplace appears sound, though it will need thorough cleaning before use." "Jacob's wife is skilled with fabrics," Matthew suggested. "She might help with curtains and linens if you provide the materials." Their planning was interrupted by Mrs. Cooper's arrival, her expression a mixture of delight at finding the newlyweds so domestically engaged and concern about other matters. "Samuel's asking for you both," she reported. "And there's a visitor from town, Eleanor Wilson, if you can believe it. Arrived not 10 minutes ago in her fancy carriage, dressed like she's calling at the governor's mansion." Matthew and Rebecca exchanged glances, both remembering Mrs. Cooper's earlier warning about the wealthy widow's interest in Matthew. Their wedding had happened so quickly that news likely hadn't reached all of Oakridge yet. "I suppose we should receive her together," Rebecca said calmly, though she smoothed her skirt with suddenly nervous hands. Matthew covered those hands with one of his own. "Together," he agreed firmly, "though I suspect this visit will be brief once our news is shared." Eleanor Wilson waited in the parlor, a vision of expensive taste in a burgundy traveling outfit, trimmed with black lace. Her handsome face, framed by fashionably arranged dark hair, showed carefully composed concern. "Matthew," she greeted him as they entered, her voice musical with practiced charm. "I've only just heard about Samuel's terrible accident. I came immediately to offer my assistance." Her gaze slid to Rebecca, polite but dismissive. "I understand. You've hired temporary help during this difficult time." "Not exactly," Matthew replied evenly, moving to stand beside Rebecca. "Mrs. Wilson, allow me to introduce Rebecca Taylor Reynolds, my wife." The shock that flashed across Eleanor's carefully composed features might have been comical under different circumstances. She recovered quickly, though spots of color remained high on her cheeks. "Wife," she repeated, her voice slightly strained. "How unexpected. I wasn't aware of an engagement." "It happened rather suddenly," Rebecca explained calmly. "We were married yesterday at Grace Lake." Eleanor's gaze darted to Rebecca's hands, noting both the sapphire engagement ring and gold wedding band. Something in her expression hardened briefly before social training reasserted itself. "Congratulations," she managed with reasonable grace. "How fortunate for Matthew to find someone willing to take on such substantial responsibilities." The slight emphasis suggested she viewed marriage to Matthew as a burden rather than a blessing. Rebecca felt him tense beside her, but placed a gentle hand on his arm. "The fortune is entirely mine, Mrs. Wilson," Rebecca replied with genuine warmth. "In Matthew, I've found everything I never dared hope for." Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly at the obvious sincerity behind the words. Before she could respond, Samuel's voice called from the study where he'd been moved for the morning. "Are you planning to keep me waiting all day? Who's out there?" The interruption provided a welcome redirection. "We should see to Samuel," Matthew said, offering his arm to Rebecca. "He grows impatient when confined." "Of course," Eleanor nodded, stiffly. "Perhaps I should return another time when he's feeling stronger." "That would be best," Matthew agreed, making no effort to convince her otherwise. "Thank you for your concern." After a minimal exchange of pleasantries, Eleanor took her leave, her carriage departing Evergreen Ranch considerably faster than it had arrived. Rebecca released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Well," she said quietly, "that was interesting." "That was Eleanor being Eleanor," Matthew corrected with a slight smile, calculating her prospects and adjusting accordingly. "She's a very handsome woman," Rebecca observed neutrally. Matthew turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "Yes, and wealthy, well-connected, and thoroughly self-interested. Samuel thought her a suitable match because of her social position. I found her company exhausting and her values incompatible with my own." He lifted Rebecca's hand, brushing his thumb across her wedding band. "You, on the other hand, bring genuine warmth to this house. You work not for appearance, but from conviction. You see value in things Eleanor would dismiss as insignificant: a new foal, meaningful conversation, honest work." His eyes held hers steadily. "There is no comparison, Rebecca. None whatsoever." The complete absence of doubt in his voice dissolved any lingering insecurity. Rebecca smiled, squeezing his hand in acknowledgement. "Samuel's waiting," she reminded him softly. "We should share our plans for the cottage." Samuel received their cottage plans with typical pragmatism, offering practical suggestions about necessary repairs while avoiding comment on the more personal aspects of their new living arrangements. His recovery continued steadily, though. His impatience with confinement tested everyone's patience. "The doctor says another 4 weeks minimum before you can even consider crutches," Rebecca reminded him firmly when he suggested overseeing the branding from horseback. "Unless you prefer permanent disability to temporary inconvenience?" Samuel glowered but subsided, recognizing the steel beneath her gentle manner. Matthew, witnessing this exchange from the doorway, concealed a smile. His practical, sensible wife was perhaps the only person besides himself who could manage his stubborn brother effectively. Over the following weeks, life at Evergreen Ranch established new patterns. Matthew and Rebecca divided their time between ranch responsibilities, Samuel's ongoing care, and preparing their cottage. Each evening, regardless of how demanding the day had been, they spent time together, sometimes working side by side on household accounts, sometimes reading aloud to each other, sometimes simply sitting on the porch swing, watching twilight settle over the valley. The cottage gradually transformed under their combined efforts. Rebecca arranged her small library on the refinished shelves, treasured volumes from Boston, finding new homes alongside Matthew's collection of natural history and animal husbandry texts. Fresh curtains brightened windows that now opened to mountain. Breezes, a colorful quilt, a wedding gift from several ranch wives who had warmed to Rebecca's unpretentious manner, adorned the bed they would share once the cottage was fully habitable. Word of their marriage spread through Oakridge, generating the expected mix of curiosity, judgment, and eventual acceptance. Rebecca accompanied Matthew to church each Sunday, meeting the community's scrutiny with quiet dignity. Some, like Eleanor Wilson, maintained cool reserve. Others, particularly those who benefited from Rebecca's willingness to assist with reading lessons for children or medical advice drawn from her experience nursing her father, gradually accepted the mail order, bride too old at 28, as a valuable addition to their small society. Mrs. Jenkins asked if I would consider teaching her daughter proper penmanship, Rebecca reported one evening as she and Matthew walked from the main house to check on the cottage's progress. Apparently, the new schoolteacher focuses primarily on the boys' education. Will you do it? Matthew asked, genuinely interested in her activities beyond the ranch. Rebecca considered thoughtfully. I think I might. Perhaps even expand it to other girls, if there's interest. Not a formal school, but regular lessons here at the ranch. Matthew nodded approvingly. The cottage has that small room off the kitchen. That would serve well as a classroom. You could use it once we've moved in. The simple support, offering space within their home, accepting her desire for meaningful work beyond household duties, reinforced what Rebecca had discovered daily since their wedding. Matthew didn't merely tolerate her capabilities, he valued and encouraged them. You continue to surprise me, she said softly, stopping their walk to face him directly. How so? He asked, genuinely curious. Many men would consider a wife teaching other people's children a distraction from proper household duties, or worry about strangers coming onto their property. Matthew's expression turned thoughtful. Perhaps I've had the luxury of independence too long to fear unconventional choices. Or perhaps, his eyes held hers warmly, I simply recognize that your mind is too valuable to be confined solely to domestic concerns, regardless of how capably you manage them. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch lingering against her cheek. Besides, I've seen how your eyes light up when you discuss books and learning. I would never wish to dim that light. Rebecca leaned into his touch, marveling again at how thoroughly this silver-haired rancher understood her. I love you, she said simply, more than I imagined possible. And I you, he replied, gathering her close against the evening breeze, far beyond any arrangement or expectation. They stood together as twilight deepened around Evergreen Ranch, the silhouette of their cottage visible against the darkening sky. A physical manifestation of the home they were building together, not just with timber and furnishings, but with understanding, respect, and deepening love. 6 months after Rebecca stepped from the train in Oakridge, she stood in the doorway of their completed cottage, watching autumn light gild the distant mountains. Beside her, Matthew wrapped an arm around her waist, his solid presence as essential, to her now as breathing. Happy? He asked quietly, though he knew the answer. Completely, she confirmed, leaning into him, though I can scarcely believe how much has changed since spring. Indeed, transformations abounded. Samuel had recovered enough to resume limited duties, though his leg would always bear evidence of the injury. The ranch had enjoyed a profitable season despite his absence from full management. Several local girls now gathered twice weekly in Rebecca's small classroom, their eager minds reminding her of her younger self, and she and Matthew had settled into a partnership that continued to deepen with each passing day, finding balance between his ranch responsibilities and her household, and teaching duties, discovering new facets of each other through both ordinary moments and occasional challenges. Do you ever regret answering that advertisement? Matthew asked, a hint of his old insecurity briefly visible. Coming all this way to marry a stranger with silver hair and a demanding ranch? Rebecca turned in his arms to face him fully. Do you regret that your high-handed brother arranged for a mail-order bride too old at 28? His smile banished any shadow of doubt. Not for a single moment. Nor I, she assured him, reaching up to touch his silver hair, the feature that had once made him self-conscious, but now served as her favorite landmark when searching for him across Evergreen Ranch's expansive grounds. "We may have come together, through unconventional means, but I believe we would have found each other somehow, somewhere." "Even across such distance?" Matthew asked, genuinely curious about her certainty. Rebecca nodded, conviction in every line of her face. Some souls are meant to recognize each other, regardless of circumstances or timing. Ours simply needed Samuel's interference to accelerate the process. Matthew laughed, the sound warm in the autumn air. "Don't let him hear you say that. His satisfaction is unbearable enough already." As if summoned by mention of his name, Samuel appeared in the distance, his gait still showing evidence of his injury, but his stride purposeful as he headed toward the main house. Beyond him, Tempest, the foal they had delivered together during that spring storm, frolicked in the pasture, growing strong and beautiful as Rebecca herself had blossomed in Montana soil. "Come," Matthew said, taking her hand. "Let's walk down to the lake before dinner. The cottonwoods are turning golden." Hand in hand, they set out across land that had witnessed their unlikely beginning and continued to nurture their thriving love. Behind them, the cottage windows reflected sunset light, a beacon of hope and home, proof that sometimes life's most precious gifts arrive in unexpected packages. The mail-order bride called too old at 28, and the silver-haired rancher who saw her perfect match had defied convention and expectation to forge something rare and beautiful. Not a practical arrangement, but a true partnership. Not a compromise, but a completion. And as they walked together beneath Montana's vast sky, they carried the quiet certainty that the best chapters of their story were still waiting to be written. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.